G'day, Hogsters. A few years ago, I worked as an interpreter. I would drive all over the south of Sweden to basically help clients. I've always enjoyed driving, but there was something particularly pleasing about this experience. Just sitting behind the wheel and letting the landscape, the weather, and what's on the radio create a mood. That was, quite a delight. And being a game designer, I of course couldn't help myself. I began forming a basic concept for a game. The idea is to create a narrative-based driving game with a heavy atmosphere, something akin to the walking simulators that were popular a few years back. A short, straightforward game with plenty of replayability. Something similar to Outrun with its branching paths, but slower. There will be occasional on-foot sections and maybe even some basic shooter mechanics. For the time being, I call this game North to South. I actually started developing the game on small scale, like a couple of years ago, before I started working at Learning Yogi. And at that point, I decided to aim for N64 style graphics. Doing so enables me to create art assets much quicker and still achieve a cohesive and appealing aesthetic. Now, before I proceed, I'd be thankful if you'd like this video and subscribe to my content. It goes without saying, but the likelihood of success will decide how fast I'll make progress and if I'll push this project on to completion. Now, for reference, I recently got Euro Truck Simulator 2. This was actually a pretty good move as I felt uncertain about a large number of things. Prior to having purchased the game, I had only seen short clips and had a vague understanding of what it's like. While ETS has mechanical vehicle damage, it's not particularly detailed. Sure, the game simulates damage to the cabin engine and drivetrain, but you won't see wheels falling off, brakes locking up, or the frame bending like in BeamNG Drive or certain rally games. In fact, there's no visual damage at all. Another aspect is traffic violations. The police will not actually chase you when you commit traffic felonies. They'll just flash their lights if they see you, and you'll see a message pop up on your screen about which violation you committed. The game tasks players with transporting goods all over Europe. Like GTA and The Legend of Zelda, the game uses shorter day-night cycles than in real life, which is straightforward and kind of obvious. However, what's not immediately obvious is that they've adjusted the distances in a similar manner. The game world is smaller than the real world. You don't actually drive across, the real distances, the real expanse of Europe. They use special manipulated distance units, essentially. So it says 1,000 miles, but in fact it might be closer to 200 miles. And it's synchronized with the day-night cycle. This is very clever and something I'm taking on board with the production of my game. Now, to make ETS more similar to what I intend to create, I downloaded a mod that enables me to drive a car. Sitting closer to the ground makes the game feel much different. In-game traffic lights and signs are positioned at a height that is much more optimized for trucks, while certain barriers and walls obstruct the view of more interesting landmarks that actually are visible from the cockpit of a truck. This is certainly something I'll consider when creating my game. As for my opinion on ETS, it's an enjoyable game that's large in scope. The aspect of starting off driving other people's trucks, then buying your own, then hiring your own crew and buying additional garages and essentially building an empire, tycoon style, gives the game quite a lot of content. But for me, it's just way too much of a grind. I'll never have the patience to actually, do the more desirable things in the game. So that's my official review of Euro Truck Simulator. Now, the first thing I began to work on was the car that users will be driving. First off was the concept of the car itself. With the game taking on N64 level graphics, I found it fitting for the game to take place in the 90s. And being a Saab fan, I found it interesting to explore the question, what would a mid-90s Saab sports car look like? My assumption is that with GM owning the brand at the time, such a sports car would be based on the same platform as the best-looking sports car of that time, the Chevy Camaro. So I took the basic proportions of the Camaro and sweetified it a bit. I gave it a bit more fighter DNA and gave it an interior that's slightly less dreadful than the Camaro we did get. I don't want to brag, but I feel that the end result is far superior to what GM put out, and I really wish that Saab had actually made this in real life. I would have bought one today. Of course, this isn't a Saab Sonnet because of, legal issues, so let me introduce you to the Snapdragon. The car is fully modeled inside and out, with illumin maps just to make the game look great at night. While the model is a bit more sophisticated than anything you'd see on the N64, it's not that far off. It's even plausible that something like this could appear in a Dreamcast game, or a game that really uses the expansion pack really well. The next major decision I took to make development quicker was to use more content of the asset store. I know there's a stigma against doing so, with asset flip being a common derogatory term for Unity games. Of course, just taking a bunch of assets and recklessly mashing them together will result in something that feels amateurish and soulless. However, a lot of things on the asset store hold very high levels of quality, much higher than I could ever hope to create myself, just based on the fact that I don't have the time. The first thing I did was to replace my own vehicle physics with an asset pack called Eddie's Vehicle Physics. I picked up this asset pack as part of a bundle a few years ago, but I didn't actually consider using it until now. However, upon testing it, it became immediately apparent that it's a feature-filled and well-thought-out asset. The physics are arcadey, so if you want to create a Gran Turismo killer, then this isn't for you. However, for this project, it's basically ideal. It's the perfect mix of, realistic handling, but approachable. Applying the physics to my model only took about an evening, with the whole point of the game being to create an immersive and atmospheric driving game. The next step was, however, to make a functioning interior. I created a script that handles the gauges based on the particular way in which Eddie's physics pack is set up. I had to retrieve data from the audio script, which took a bit of experimenting to figure out. Now I have functioning gauges for speed, engine RPM, as well as turbo pressure. Next up was the car's lighting. It's both useful and immersive to allow users to manipulate the car's exterior lights. This means being able to toggle the full beams as well as using the turn signals. After this, I proceeded to add indicator lights for the interior. To achieve this, I added a second camera that records an image of the instrument cluster and outputs a render texture. That render texture is used only as an illumin map. Beyond the lights, there's also an indicator light for when the users apply the handbrakes. And lastly, there's something that's perhaps not very realistic for a 90s car, but is useful for the player, and that is a gear indicator. Next thing on my mind was the world. I made a quick decision on how the branching paths will work. After a linear intro, users will be able to take different paths, with each representing different genres, including action and horror. The player starts off at work, a game studio, because the protagonist is, lo and behold, a game designer. He walks out of the office, gets into his car, and goes home. This initial sequence is supposed to introduce players to the core concepts of the game, including on-foot sections and driving. To create these large worlds in a short manner of time, I actually use techniques that were common on the N64. I use walls to represent forests, which was very common on the N64. It creates a feel for the game, but it also enables me to work much quicker, because the idea is that I'm going to create hundreds of miles of roads in the game, and I can't be, as meticulous as the whole ETS team was, for example. I can't be as detailed as the Forza Horizon team. So the initial sequence is intended to tell players who the main protagonist is and what world he lives in. He's a young man living a fairly happy life. He's fairly successful. He works in a city but lives by the beach on a peninsula. He's a surfer. Once the players drive home, they will see the protagonist's home from the inside and gain a better understanding of who he is. They'll see surfboards in the garage and a minimalist bachelor pad. Upon reaching the living room, his girlfriend calls, and she asks if he wants to see her at a restaurant on a nearby island. The idea is that this will introduce the player to another mechanic. Sequences where the camera pans and zooms to objects of interest. In these sequences, the draw distance will greatly increase. Time will slow down, while the fog and depth of field effects reduce. Players will then drive over to this restaurant, get out of the car, and realize that she's not there. Upon returning to the car, the player will receive a phone call. A laser dot from across the water shines through the windshield, and a mysterious voice tells you that you have to do as he says, and thus starts the adventure. So that's it for now. If you like this concept, please subscribe to get updates in the future. If there's something you'd like to change, please leave a comment. Until next time, have an awesome day.